Hi, everyone. Welcome to the latest installment of our ongoing editorial webinar series, Coffee Talk. Each hour-long, information-packed episode, organized by the hardworking folks at Redmond Magazine, features the observations and insights of an independent expert on a wide range of tech industry topics. Many thanks to the underwriting sponsor of this episode, Quest Software, protecting and empowering users and data, streamlining items, and hardening cybersecurity from the inside out since 1987. Without their support, this series would not be possible. And thanks to you for joining us. I'm John K. Waters, Editor-in-Chief of the Converge 360 Group of 1105 Media, and I'll be your moderator. The title of today's talk is Endpoint Security 101, and our lead presenter is technologist, creator of compelling content, and senior resultant, Howard M. Cohen. But before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping here. This episode is being recorded for later access. Keep an eye out for an email with a link to that recording. It'll be coming your way in the next few days. We'll make some time during the talk for questions. Please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box at any time. We'll do our best to get to all of them. Our sponsor has provided some extra resources you absolutely will not want to miss. They're available now on your console. And as a small thank you to the first 200 attendees who stick with us to the end, we will be sending you a $5 gift certificate to Starbucks. It's a cup of joe to go with the info. Now let's meet our first presenter. Howard M. Cohen has spent more than 40 years in the IT industry. During that time, he has held senior executive positions in many of the top channel partner organizations, and he currently writes for and about IT and the IT channel. He is a sought-after speaker, an insightful observer of the technology landscape, and one of our favorite presenters. You're in for a great session. Take it away, Howard.
Thank you, John, and welcome everybody to Endpoint Security 101. As John pointed out, I am a creator of compelling content. If you'd like to sample it, notice on the bottom the Business Technologist Journal. You can scan that QR code for the next 3 seconds, or just go to biztechjournal.substack.com. Okay, so today we're going to talk about endpoint security on a very fundamental level. Those of you who've been with me before, and by the way, I just want to say hi to our favorite frequent flyer, Lynn. I know you're out there. Today's word is pretty obvious. It's shields. Okay, you have a starship, you need shields. You need to make sure that nothing gets at it that shouldn't be getting at it. To provide an analogy that might be a little closer to home, let's say that you're hanging out and decide, I think I'm going to go visit the Prime Minister of England. Okay, so you go to number 10 Downing Street and you walk up and you want to get in. So what are you going to do? Well, obviously you're going to knock on the door. But if nobody answers, well, you may just try to turn the knob. Okay, so you turn the knob and the door doesn't open. So you look around and you say, well, let's see, there's a window over there. Maybe I can open that and climb in. There's another window over there. There's probably more windows too. There may even be a back door, but let's not even get into that. Obviously, if you're seriously needing to get in to see the Prime Minister, you're going to have to break down the door or break a window. And that's kind of like people trying to break into your endpoint device. So we recommended to the Prime Minister that he put up a storm door, a security door on the front, and put some bars on the window to make sure nobody can do that. And that is the equivalent of endpoint security. It's very simply putting up the things you need to make sure that the people who shouldn't get in don't get in. All right, so let's come back to our starship and talk a little bit about endpoints. In the beginning, in the earliest days of network computing, 40 years or so ago, we basically all had local area networks, right? And in a local area network, every device in the office was connected either to a backbone cable that went through the place or to a hub of some kind or a concentrator. And everybody was connected. So if any of your users needed to gain access to network resources, they simply sat behind one of these devices and logged into the network. Good news, there was no way that anybody was going to hurt them because nobody could get in or out. And as a matter of fact, it was really early on in the development of the internet, and it wasn't very well connected to anybody yet. So we were all happy, sitting in our own little LAN, doing our thing, sharing file servers, sharing printers and other peripherals, sending little messages to each other. Life was good. Then along came the wide area network. And all of a sudden, everybody could connect to anywhere. You could get a long line going from your New York office, for example, to your Los Angeles office or your Chicago office and your Dallas, Texas. You could have connections to all of your offices. And now you could all communicate with each other. The problem is that the internet came along. And when the internet came along, everybody started connecting to everything through it. And now, no matter what you were connecting to, there was a good possibility that you were also connecting to the internet. And now your LAN was no longer safe. No longer could you depend upon the fact that you're completely isolated to keep you from being robbed of your data or worse. And so what did you do? You went out and you erected a firewall. And the firewall, well, that was a terrific, terrific development. Because if anything was coming into your network, your LAN, that you didn't want coming in, you could filter it out. You could keep it from coming in. And by the same token, if anybody in your organization was trying to reach out to something or send something to somebody that you didn't want them doing it, you could keep them from doing it. Now, a little bit of history. The very first firewall, little known fact, because nobody's as old as me anymore, the very first firewall was called the Gauntlet. It was produced by a company called Trusted Information Systems, the Gauntlet. And Trusted Information had a very, very simple call to action, a battle cry, if you will. And that is, that which is not specifically permitted is strictly forbidden. So basically, their firewall shut off everything. And if you wanted anything let through, you had to actually actively let that get through. To this day, a lot of people continue to observe it's not specifically permitted, it's strictly forbidden. And they help themselves do that. Okay, by doing that. So great, now we had some control over it, we had some security, life seemed good, but then, many years later, we rocket forward to the year 2020. Anybody remember what happened in 2020? Yeah, we all got sick. The COVID pandemic sent everybody anywhere home to work from home. Now, all of a sudden, all of our people were connecting in from their wide area network. And most of them weren't even doing that. They were connecting from the internet. Okay, now we've got a problem. Our firewall just became useless. It only protects the people who are still on the LAN, and they're gone. They've all gone home. So now what do? Now we have all these people all over the place that we have to protect. And how are we going to go do that? So one thing we could have done, well, let's go put a firewall at each of their homes. Think about the cost involved in doing that. Not just the cost of purchasing all those hardware firewalls, but the cost of installing them. And even beyond that, it's in somebody's home. What do you think the cost of supporting that is going to end up being? So that was not a good idea. So we came up with a new solution, firewall as a service. You can get everything else as a service. You can get infrastructure as a service. You can get software as a service. You can get everything as a service. Why not firewall? And so virtual firewalls replaced hardware firewalls. Now we could put protection around each of our people. And best of all, we could centrally control that and manage that. So if it needed any new rules added, we could do that from where we were. Okay, so firewall as a service was one very important development in the improvement of endpoint security, but not the only one. So let's talk about for a moment what we're talking about when we say endpoint. There may be those amongst you who are wondering what really constitutes an endpoint. Okay, pretty simple. Anything you connect to the network is an endpoint. So your smartphone is an endpoint. Your desktop computer, that's an endpoint too. Up at the top there, I decided to use the Microsoft Surface Pro because it's both a laptop that thinks it's a tablet and a tablet that thinks it's a laptop. And so I was able to get both, two in one, and put something on there that's hybrid, and everybody loves hybrid. So laptops, tablets, file servers. File servers are endpoints, as are peripherals. They're all endpoints. Anything that connects to your network is considered an endpoint. Now, for those of you who are staring longingly at the starship, let me assure you, this is not yet an endpoint. Okay, there may come a day when that will be one of our endpoints, but right now it doesn't really exist. Okay, one last piece that's involved in every endpoint is the piece that exists between the keyboard and the chair, the pebcat, the person, the human, the end user who is using that endpoint device. And they are a very important part of the endpoint as well. Okay, so now that we understand the nature of endpoints, understand that it's not just a piece of hardware, there's software involved there are services involved, and there are people involved. It is the collection of all of that. And that endpoints are basically the easiest door to get through to get into your network. Clearly, they need to be protected. And they need to be protected very, very well. Not just from somebody connecting to them to get into your network, but from somebody stealing them, from you losing them. There's all kinds of things that can happen to an endpoint because it's portable in most cases. So there's lots of things we have to worry about that are physical as well as digital. The first and foremost thing, though, and this is true of so many things, the very first element of endpoint security is the same as so many other things. It's policy. Policy. Okay, so we talked about the firewall before, right? Well, the stated purpose of a firewall, if you go back to the original, I believe it's the original Gartner definitions, but the original definition of a firewall is that it is the tool used to enforce your security policy. Of course, the problem there is if you don't have a policy, there's really nothing for your firewall to enforce. And so you definitely want to have security policies in place to cover everything and anything that you could possibly need. Okay, so let's talk about some of the elements of our endpoint security policy. First up, we need to have a comprehensive inventory of every endpoint that's connected to your network from anywhere, wherever it's connected, whether it's connected via Wi-Fi, whether it's connected via 5G, doesn't really matter. If it's connecting to your network, you need to be able to see it, and you need to know that it's coming. And anything that's outside that inventory should be strictly prohibited. Okay, here's the next layer of your problem, though. One thing about a smartphone device, doesn't really matter if you own it or if your employee owns it. They're very likely going to have some personal data sitting on it, right? Now, unless they want to look like a drug dealer and have multiple phones, which is kind of worrisome, they're probably going to be using that device for their personal things as well as for work. Now, since it is a corporate device, there's definitely going to be corporate business data on there as well. Here's the problem. the two must never mix, ever. Imagine that one of your users uses Facebook Messenger to send one of your files to a buddy. They have just overcome and completely negated every security measure you have in place. Your entire investment in data and network security is gone. Gone. Because they can easily send your data elsewhere. Can't allow that to happen. So you have to find a way to firewall between the two. There's got to be some kind of partition, some kind of segmentation between their personal data and your corporate data. And going a step further, if the phone is ever lost or stolen, the very first thing you're going to want to do is turn it into a brick. That is to say, erase it completely. So it is completely inert, completely useless. And the problem you face is that in some localities, it may be against the law for you to destroy your users' data. So you're going to have to figure that out as you go. Okay, so we have some real challenges. And by the way, those of you who said, well, what about VDI? Very good idea. Another very viable strategy for getting smartphones on your network. Here is the laptop desktop. And it's a reminder that it is best to make sure that every device that's connecting to your network has the current version of the operating system, the current level of security software, and all the security updates, all of the software updates, all of the other updates that are out there. And when it comes to patches, yes, you want to interrogate your patches to make sure they won't break anything else. But once you've done that, and you need to do it quickly, you want to be able to distribute those patches to every device very quickly, centrally. I am not saying that anybody's users are incompetent. What I am saying is that the competence of users is not consistent. Not every user has the same level of competence with technology. Some will get it right every time, others will never get it right, and everybody else is in between. You can't depend upon your users to do their updating and their patching and whatnot. That is just a terrible idea. And so we really don't want to do it. When it comes to users, you want to employ the principle of least privilege. Very simple. When somebody logs into your network, they are authenticated, right? They have to give a password and hopefully something else. Well, when they're authenticated, they also get authorization to use specific resources. So you don't want to give every resource to everybody. You know, for example, your Marcom division doesn't usually need access to your financial data. And your sales division probably doesn't need access to your manufacturing data. You see where I'm going here. Each department unto itself should have access to the data that allows them to do their job. And, you know, the idea of departments is a good one to follow too. If you use role-based access control, you take each of your users, and let's say you have a couple of thousand users, and you park a bunch of them in your financial department, and there are some in your sales department, others in your marketing department, there are others in your manufacturing department and operations and many other things in between. When it comes time to change access privileges, when it comes time to change somebody's rights, you don't go to each and every one of your thousands of employees. That's the easiest way to make mistakes. If you're doing the same thing repetitively over and over and over again, you can almost guarantee you're going to make mistakes somewhere along the way. Instead, you're just going to make those changes to the groups. And everybody who's in each group gets the changes you gave them. So RBAC, role-based access control, is a very good way to control access in a large network. or a small network. Any network, every network should now be using multi-factor authentication. There's just no excuse. It is so easy today. And all you've got to do is turn it on for all your users. Just about everybody has a smartphone on which they can receive a 6-digit or 4-digit or 8-digit code. And they have to enter that code along with their password to gain access to your network, combining something they know, their password, with something they have, their smartphone. Amazing increases in security when it comes down to that. And there are really two reasons that that's so important, and both have to do with bad habits. The thing is, depending on whose study you look at, somewhere between 70 and 80% of all users on all networks have the same password, and that is password. That's right. Tons of people are using password as their password. Some try to be tricky and make it P4SSW0RD. Nobody's fooled. Others use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Some use their dog's name. Others use their spouse's name. It's usually something simple. Those who do use or are forced to use complex passwords, they get around that too. They write that complex password on a sticky note, and they stick it under their keyboard where nobody will ever find it, except we know lots of people can find it. Some are so lazy they stick the sticky note on the front of their monitor. So that's a bad solution too. And therefore, you can't trust users to manage their own passwords. Better to have multi-factor authentication and make sure that the password is almost superfluous, almost unnecessary. So in the realm of network access control, when someone tries to log into your network from anywhere on any device, you want to make sure that that user authenticates themselves, that they're authorized for the right resources, and also that the device is authenticated and authorized. Is it the device it says it is? Is it running the most current version of its software? Is it fully prepared to connect to your network? Does it run sufficient security software to connect to your network? All of that has to be interrogated every time a device tries to connect. And that is one of the jobs of network access control. Finally, when it comes to users in a world where ransomware is still the #1 security threat, and that involves human engineering, you need to be training your users regularly, and you need to be updating them regularly. Now, right now is a particularly good time to be reminding them, welcome to National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Every October, National Cybersecurity Awareness Month is a time where we can really focus in on the importance of cybersecurity and make sure that everybody knows it's their responsibility. Most every device you have has ports. It's crucial. I mean, not only USB ports, there are some serial ports still out there. There are other ports out there. You need to make sure that every port is under your monitoring and under your control. If somebody puts a USB stick into a USB port and tries to copy files off, you've got to be able to make sure that that doesn't happen unless they've contacted you first to get permission. That's control. And getting down to the fundamentals, there's a word in this particular paragraph that I'm going to, oh, I already did. It's already highlighted in red. Look at that. You have to achieve and maintain full visibility. Visibility of what? The answer is yes. Visibility of everything. Every endpoint device, every software application, every user, every port on every device, you name it. You want to have visibility of it. You want to be able to see it and see what it's doing, see where it is, see what it's connected to, as much as you can see. And you want systems in place that get all that data and are able to quickly detect and identify any anomalies or potential attacks that are coming in. Again, all a part of endpoint security. It's not all running on the device. A lot of it is running in your data center or in your cloud. And coming down to the most important metric of all, the attitude of your users. Those of you who hate the screaming, yelling user alert, let's get rid of it. If you detect the problem early, identify it immediately, and that's followed by rapid remediation. Whether you have to reset something, re-image something, whatever you have to do, if that happens 1, 2, 3, you're going to have a very happy user community. The thing that upsets them most is when they realize something's wrong, they've reported it, find out that everybody's reporting it, we haven't figured it out yet. You need to start putting everything in place so that you can figure it out quickly, and there's plenty of help out there for you. Also, at the very last step, is reporting to the required authorities. If you are subject to maintaining regulatory compliance with any given regulatory acts, you're probably required to report any events that happen in the way of security exploits or what have you. The act itself indicates who you have to report to and by when. Usually you have a very tight deadline. You have to report pretty much immediately. So be sure to review the act and prepare your management people to report to where they need to report as quickly as they need to. Okay, we're heading down to the end. We've talked about the users, we've talked about the devices, the hardware, and the software. The last thing I want to talk about is everybody's favorite slide. No, it's not bacon. It's data. And why bacon? Because everybody loves bacon. Most people tell you the only thing better than bacon is more bacon, right? Well, the same is true of data. Everybody loves their data. Everybody values their data more highly than anything else. And the only thing better than data, we prove every day, it's more data, because we're generating more and more data each and every day. It's amazing. It's inconceivable sometimes. And so the very last line of defense is to encrypt all your data, not just when it's traveling from place to place, but also when it's at rest in storage, whether that's in the cloud, your own data center, doesn't matter. Wherever it's in storage, it must be encrypted. And you know why? Because then when somebody tries to steal it, they end up with garbage. Unless they have the key, they can't do anything with it. And let me remind you, you never need to give that key to your cloud provider. Your cloud provider has no need for the key. They're not interested in your payloads. They're not interested in your data. So do not give them the key. Do not give anybody the key unless they are specifically supposed to have it. Which brings me back to focusing in on the word that I said was most important, and that is visibility. I can't stress enough. Whatever systems you put in place, whatever software you choose to use to accomplish endpoint security, the first thing you want to look at is how much visibility it gives you into everything. The more visibility, the better off you're going to be. If it alerts you when things go out of threshold, perfect. Visibility. So let's just run down in detail one last time. You want visibility of every endpoint that's in your inventory, whether or not it's active. You may want to know about the inactive devices so you can anticipate they may change your load balancing. Every connection to your network, and when somebody has connected that you know nothing about. Every data asset and every workload, and if you find a data asset on there, you can bet you probably have shadow IT going on somewhere. You need to root it out and get control over it. Every user and what they're using. This is especially in a cloud environment where users connect to virtual machines and you pay as long as they're using it. Many times they'll fail to release it. And so it sits there as a phantom, not being used, but you're still paying for it. So you want to know what everybody's using to make sure they're still actively using every VM. every software license that's in use and every software license or subscription that is idle. There is nothing that is more career altering than onboarding new employees and buying each one of them a new license or a new subscription when you've offboarded some employees recently and their licenses and their subscriptions are sitting in an inventory doing nothing. You just paid for more when you have already in stock doing nothing. And that can be a nasty thing in your life. You want to know every software application that's running. So again, you may have some shadow IT applications out there. You need to detect them and resolve them quickly. And you want to know every potential threat, not after it's happened, but as it's arising. As it's arising. You want to see it forming on the way in. Then, with all that visibility, you want control over every mobile device. You want centralized MDM, centralized mobile device management. So if a device does have to be bricked, you can brick it. If somebody's having a problem with a device, they just have to call support, and you can reach out through the network and solve their problem for them. Centralized MDM is critical. Centralized network access control. You have to authenticate everybody and everything as it's trying to connect to your network. Centralized patch and update management. Do not leave that to users. Users will forget. Not all of them, but some of them. And software application distribution, same thing. You want to make sure that it's completely controlled by you. Bottom line, you want to have the ability to immediately stop any threat before it can harm anybody. That may sound like a panacea, and maybe it is, but your ability to do it is completely dependent upon the remediation tools you choose. Now, I use the word tools here, but here's a thought. We used to choose the best of breed tool for each and every function. And engineers were very proud of the tools they chose. And they became the resident expert. And of course, if they ever left the company no longer had a resident expert in that tool. Today, we recommend best of platform. Find the platforms that give you the most of the tools you need, because they all work better together. And it's easier to train people on one consistent interface. And it's certainly much less expensive and much easier to support everybody on that singular interface. And finally, because you have reporting responsibilities, you want to make sure you have a security incident and event management product in place, helping you report and helping you manage each incident and each event as it's occurring. That is everything. And let me leave you then with the holy grail of endpoint security. And please, you must choose wisely. It's a 1, 2, 3. 1, sound the red alert early. Let everybody know there's a problem out there and we need to fix it. Number 2, identify and evaluate the nature of that problem as quickly as you possibly can. Have a plan B if you can't. But then, as quickly as you've identified it, remediate it. Whatever you have to do, provide remediation and call game over on that threat. Detect it, identify it, resolve it. Bing, bang, boom. And with that, John, have we generated any questions?
You sure have. Thank you so much, Howard. I was happy to see the bacon slide again. Okay. Okay, folks. Remember, you love the bacon. I love the bacon. It's a little triggering, but I still really like it. Remember, everybody, you can type your questions into the Q&A box at any time. We'll do our best to get to all of them. So our first question is an awesome one, as usual, from Lynn. What are some of the most prevalent threats and vulnerabilities that endpoint security aims to protect against?
Okay, so the second half of that question makes it a challenging Lynn question. I was worried. It sounded easy. Thank you, Lynn. Well, first of all, still to this day, the studies that I'm looking at say that ransomware and all the things that lead up to ransomware are the most prevalent vulnerabilities. And again, because they're using human engineering to attack users, getting users to make a mistake and click a link or open up an attachment that's going to lead them to disaster. Endpoint security actually can help. Endpoint security can identify the threat that's caused when they make that mistake and stop it from becoming a problem. On the way in, some endpoint security can identify anomalistic behavior, people doing stuff they don't usually do, and questioning, why is this person doing that? Why is this salesman accessing the blueprints for that product? And so that's a way in which it can help. More to the point, I guess, intrusion prevention of any kind is really the core value of most endpoint security, making sure that things that shouldn't get in don't get in. And that takes a lot of different shapes, which I suspect you'll hear about in our next presentation. But also, I mean, endpoint security is not just a thing. It's a suite of things. It's many things. It's authentication, it's intrusion prevention, there's antivirus, anti-malware. There's no one thing unto itself. It's a much more holistic kind of approach to keeping the bad guys out. So, as usual, I hope that answered your question, Lynn, but let's move on to the next.
Fascinating. Thank you, Howard. We've got a good one here from Zeke, who's wondering, what about hybrid users who work from home some days and the office on others? Do they have to have two different security setups? You kind of addressed this a little bit, but maybe a little more here.
Yeah, well, I guess to some extent it depends upon what kind of device they're using. If they are still a desktop user, which is becoming fewer and fewer people, yeah, they need both machines set up to protect. They need an endpoint solution on both endpoints. If, on the other hand, they are traveling back and forth with a laptop or with a tablet or any portable device, they can probably get that device set up. And there may be, and this is going back into antiquity, from the very beginning, people felt that there were certain rights that you should assign to a user, but only if they're in the home office. If they're out there remote in the wild, woolly world, no. They don't get those rights. I don't know how many people are still observing that kind of thing, but I do remember that it was important to some people. In that case, you may want them to identify where they're connecting from, or you may want to identify where they're connecting from IP address or what have you. But I would say most people are using portable devices. Most people just need to have solid endpoint protection on that device, especially if you have firewall as a service in place. If you're using zero trust, for example, and you're protecting everybody from your core network, usually one setup will suffice.
Here's an intriguing question from Annie, who's wondering, you said you can't put a firewall in front of each user, but don't they have their own firewall already in place?
Oh, I'm sure they do. I'm absolutely sure they do. And if you were to speak to any engineer, you will never hear them call it a firewall. I can't repeat what some of them will call it, but if they were being polite, they would say, well, yes, but that's a residential firewall. Residential is a euphemism for weak, almost useless. Now, that's not fair. There may be some residential firewalls that are spectacular. I don't know. But I'd rather default to the most stringent position and say, okay, so if it's a residential firewall, that's not good enough. I require industrial strength firewall. And for that reason alone, I mean, yeah, if it's not hurting anything, sure, leave that firewall in place as a second line of defense. they're going to want to leave it in place to defend their own network. But from the perspective of protecting your assets, you want your firewall in place with your control, your ability to add new rules as necessary, your ability to respond to anomalistic behavior. You need control. And therefore, a residential firewall is just insufficient.
Okay. So Sven is wondering, Howard, are you suggesting that users shouldn't be able to change their own smartphones? to make changes on their own smartphones? Are you saying they shouldn't be able to make changes on their own smartphones?
That's a horse of a different color. To make changes on their smartphone. Okay. I've never been popular for this perspective. I have had, across the 40 years that I've been in IT, I have had several clients insist that every endpoint be as completely locked down as is humanly possible. My very first project of that nature took 9 months to accomplish because the end user the end manager kept finding new possible exploits that we had to protect against. He was very good at it. So my perspective has always been, if it's in a corporate setting, then I want complete control. And if anybody wants to add anything, then they need to have my people reach in and add it. There are tons and tons of stories about CEOs whose daughter came into the office and loaded a game on her father's computer so she could play with it while he was out. And that game spread unknown Trojans and worms and viruses all over the network. I mean, so many of them that some of them really have to be true. There are environments, I'm sure, where you can sequester an area where people can do their own thing. But if it's me, if I'm managing a network, I become somewhat of a control freak. And I want to make sure that I don't let anybody introduce anything naughty onto my network.
We've got just one more question here from Gary, who's wondering, do we need to redefine endpoint management? He says, not sure.
Do we need to redefine endpoint management? Okay, Gary. I don't know if you're going to appreciate this answer, but you'd have to first tell me what the definition of endpoint management is. I'm sorry. There's so many.
You can still do that, Gary, if you get it in quick.
There are so many people with so many different definitions of what constitutes endpoint management. If you come from my overbearing control freak perspective, then no, you don't have to redefine it. I've always defined it the same way. I have universal control over everything. That's it. It has saved me from many, many disasters. That's the only thing I can say. But I don't know that there is one single central endpoint management definition that everybody salutes to. Maybe James knows, and when he comes up next, he'll share it. But I think, we need to define, and I think that every network manager has to define endpoint management for themselves. This is what you can expect from my IT department in the way of endpoint management. Give your users a warning so they know what's coming.